My name is Callie Reyes, and I'm 32 years old. 4 weeks after I brought my son home from the hospital, I stood in my own garage at 11 at night, rocking him against the smell of motor oil and cardboard, because my father had decided the nursery made a better office than a nursery. He didn't ask. He announced it, the way you'd announce a weather forecast, standing in the doorway with a box of extension cords in his arms, while my 6-pound son screamed against a space heater that couldn't keep up with the Ohio spring. There was one thing my father had conveniently forgotten in all his rearranging. One document, signed 3 years ago, sitting in a drawer he'd never once opened. And what I finally showed him on a Sunday morning, right there on the kitchen table, made him go so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator humming. But let me back up, because none of this makes sense unless you understand who my father is, and who I'd spent my whole life being to him. I'm a labor and delivery nurse at St. Mary's in Columbus. 12-hour shifts, the kind where you're on your feet from sunrise to the next sunrise, catching other people's babies while your own back screams at you to sit down. I bought this house myself 4 years ago, at 28, with a down payment built out of double shifts and a stubborn refusal to touch my savings for anything but this. A little brick 2-bedroom on Larchmont Street. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. My name on the deed. My name on the mortgage. And when my father's apartment lease fell through 18 months ago, I did what felt right. I gave him the 2nd bedroom, rent-free, no questions. Because he was my dad, and that's what you do. I should tell you something about my father, Walter. He's a good man, in most of the ways that count. He raised me alone after my mom passed when I was 9. Worked 2 jobs so I'd never feel the gap. I owe him more than I can say. But somewhere in the last 18 months, something in him had quietly rearranged. The 2nd bedroom stopped feeling like a favor and started feeling like his room. His mail came there. His name went on the little chalkboard by the door where I used to write grocery lists, now covered in his fishing schedule. I noticed it. I let it go. Grief does strange things to a house, I told myself. Then my son, Eli, came 3 weeks early, 7 pounds of stubborn lungs, and my late mother's exact frown. And somewhere between the hospital and home, my father decided that a newborn's nursery was wasted space for a man who'd finally, at 61, decided to start his own small woodworking business from home. He didn't tell me he was moving Eli's crib. He didn't tell me he was moving us. I came home from a 12-hour shift, exhausted, engorged, barely able to see straight, and found my son's bassinet sitting in the garage between a lawnmower and a stack of paint cans. My father, already halfway through, unpacking a desk into the room I'd painted the color of a robin's egg. The nursery, he said, not even turning around, is going to be my office now. I want to be fair to my father before I go further, because that's the part people always skip when they tell a story like this. He wasn't cruel in big dramatic ways. He was cruel in small, patient ones. The kind that build a house one brick at a time until you're standing outside your own front door wondering when the walls stopped being yours. The first week, I let it go. I told myself grief does strange things to a man. That turning 61 with no wife and a business idea he'd been circling for a decade was its own kind of desperation. I moved Eli's bassinet into my own room instead, dragged the changing table into a corner by the window, and told myself it was temporary. My father, for his part, acted like nothing unusual had happened at all. He hummed while he measured the nursery wall for shelving. He asked me, genuinely pleased with himself, whether I thought the light was better for staining wood in the morning or the afternoon. I should have said something that first night. I didn't. 12 years of being the responsible one. The one who doesn't make waves, doesn't just turn off because you become a mother. It follows you into the hallway at 2 in the morning when your newborn won't settle and your father is asleep in the room that was supposed to be his grandson's. By the 2nd week, the woodworking business had a name. Reyes and Son Custom Furniture, stenciled on a sign he'd made himself and propped against the garage door, right next to the space where Eli's bassinet had briefly lived before I moved it inside. He'd started taking calls in there, actual client calls, his voice carrying warm and confident through the wall my son shared, discussing oak versus maple like the room had never held anything but sawdust. You'll thank me, he told me one morning, pouring his coffee like he did every morning of my childhood. This business is going to set me up for the rest of my life. And it's for both of us, Callie. Family looks out for family. I didn't answer. I was doing math instead, the kind you do with your jaw clenched. 18 months of free rent, 18 months of a man who paid nothing toward the mortgage, now measuring my dead mother's grandson's room for a table saw. The Thursday it got worse. I came home from a double shift to find he'd hired someone. A contractor's truck sat in my driveway, and through the nursery window, I watched a stranger in a tool belt tearing the robin's egg paint off the wall with a scraper. dust falling like snow onto the hardwood I'd refinished myself the year before. My father met me at the door, hands on his hips, proud as a man, unveiling a gift. Insulation, he said, for the equipment. You don't want sawdust getting into the vents. I stood there with Eli asleep against my chest, watching a man scrape the last of the color off my son's nursery wall, and I felt something in me go very, very quiet. Not angry yet, just still. The way water goes still right before it decides which direction to move. I found the document 3 days later, tucked behind old tax files in the box I'd never fully unpacked from moving in. Not what I expected. A folder, my father's handwriting on the tab, dated 3 years back, right after I closed on the house. Inside was a signed agreement between us, one I'd forgotten I'd even asked him to put in writing back then. Back when he'd first offered to help me cover closing costs. $5,000, a loan, not a gift. Both our signatures at the bottom, my own careful cursive right next to his. I'd paid him back within the year, wire transfers I still had records of on my banking app, and at the bottom of the page, in his own hand, one line I'd forgotten completely. Upon repayment in full, no further claim, financial or residential, is made or implied by either party regarding the property at 214 Larchmont Street. He'd written that himself. He'd wanted it in writing back when he still respected boundaries. Back before 18 months of free rent quietly convinced him the house had somehow become half his. I sat on the floor of my bedroom with Eli asleep in his bassinet beside me and read it 4 times. And something in my chest that had been clenched for 2 weeks finally loosened just slightly. Not because I needed permission to be angry. I'd earned that the day I watched a stranger scrape paint off my son's nursery wall, but because now I had something more useful than anger. I had proof. I didn't confront him that night. I've learned, working labor and delivery for 9 years, that the worst thing you can do in a crisis is move before you're ready. So I called my friend Denise, a paralegal I'd known since nursing school, and read her the paragraph over the phone while Eli nursed in the dark. "That's airtight, Cal," she said. "He signed away any residential claim himself. You don't even need a lawyer to enforce that, though I'd still document everything from here on." So I did. I photographed the stripped nursery wall. I saved every text where he'd casually referred to my workshop instead of the spare room. I wrote down dates. I kept it all in a folder of my own, right next to his. Saturday morning, I found him in the garage, sanding a table leg, sawdust drifting gold in the light from the open door. Eli's old bassinet still pushed into the corner where he'd shoved it weeks ago like an afterthought. "Dad," I said, "I need you to come inside. There's something I want to show you." He wiped his hands on his jeans, unbothered, still humming that same tune he'd been humming since the day he decided the nursery was his. He had no idea what was waiting for him on the kitchen table. He had no idea that the daughter he'd spent 18 months quietly deciding was too soft to push back had, in fact, been paying attention the entire time. He came in, wiping sawdust off his hands onto his jeans. Still not really looking at me, already half telling me about some cherry wood he'd found on sale. And I just set the folder down on the table. Didn't say anything at first. Let him see the tab in his own handwriting before I said a word. He went quiet. I watched him read it. Actually read it, not skim it. His eyes going back to that one line twice, maybe 3 times. Upon repayment in full, no further claim is made or implied. His own words. I remember his jaw doing this thing it used to do when I was a teenager and got caught. Like he was chewing on something he didn't want to swallow. "I forgot I wrote that," he said. Quiet. Not defensive, not yet. Just tired, almost. "I didn't," I said. And then, because I'd promised myself I'd say this part calm, no matter what. "Dad, I love you. I do. But Eli needs his room back. Not next month. This week." He didn't argue the paper. That's the thing about my father. For all his stubbornness, he's never once been a man who lies to himself when the truth's sitting right in front of him in his own handwriting. He just sat down at the table, hard, like his knees had finally caught up with the rest of him. And for a second, I thought he was going to be angry. He wasn't. He put his head in his hands and said, "I got scared, Cal, starting something new at 61. I didn't think about what I was doing to you. I needed it to be mine." And I sat down across from him, and I told him I understood that, because I did. Losing Mom had taken something from him he'd never really gotten back. And I think some part of him had been trying to build a room that was just his own for 30 years. And it landed on the wrong door at the wrong time. We didn't fix it that night. It took him 2 weekends to move his tools into the actual garage. The one that's supposed to hold tools, not babies. And I helped him build shelving for it myself, because that's what we do. We build things with our hands instead of saying sorry out loud. The nursery got repainted, the same robin's egg, and this time he helped me do it. Roller in one hand, coffee going cold on the windowsill. Eli's 5 months old now. He sleeps in that room every night. Under a mobile my father carved himself, little wooden birds turning slow in the dark. My father still runs Reyes and Son out of the actual garage. And honestly, business is good. He sold a table to my next door neighbor last month. Sometimes families don't need a war to find their way back to fair. Sometimes they just need one honest conversation, a piece of paper, and someone willing enough to hold the door open for